Hey, Alan, can I ask you a non-ACES question before we start?
Sure. We're not being recorded. No problem.
I will keep the profanity to a minimum just in case.
You are live streaming, just so we're clear. Sorry, I jumped the gun. I live streamed this before we normally do it, so just to be aware.
It's all good. The water in the park, Seal Park on the corner, do you know why that's still on?
I haven't shut it off yet.
Isn't it usually off?
I forget. It'll probably be shut. It'll probably be shut off this week.
Okay.
Yeah. I tried to have him shut it. Actually, I don't know. I tried to have him shut it off at the sprinkler, because basically at this point the kids are just pushing that button so they can watch the water flow. And I mean, we have plenty of water, thank goodness, in New York State, but it's still wasteful and doesn't educate kids in terms of responsibilities. I think I don't want to get into that whole thing about but whatever. And because I still needed the water to do the tree pits around and this and that, but it seems I think we only have 2 plumbers for all of Manhattan or something like that, maybe 3 plumbers, and they're in the process now of going through all the parks and shutting everything down. So, but the last word I got, it'll be shut down the middle of the month. So they'll try to get him in there this week. Thank you.
Have we hit our magic number, Jesse?
I think you have. I think you have, but let me just double check. You're good.
All right. Well, let's be respectful of folks' time and get the ball rolling. Evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is the November meeting of the Manhattan Community Board for ACES Committee. We are meeting virtually because the new-ish governor has given us authorization to do so. And we have only a couple agenda items tonight. We will start off with the team from Avenues, who will do a quick presentation. And then we will talk through subcommittee by subcommittee what we'd like to focus on for the rest of the year. And then if there's any new or old business that folks want to bring back up, we can also make sure there's space for that before we close out. And also want to acknowledge that we have Jordan from our city councilman's office. He's our city councilman for a little while longer before the new one steps in. Thank you for prioritizing this. Alan, anything you wanted to add before we kick it over to our friends at Avenues?
No, I think it's nice to have them back again, and looking forward to hearing for what they have to say. Thank you, Kim.
All right, Morgan, I think it is your show.
Thank you so much. I'm going to pass it on to Dr. Fox here. Thank you so much, Kit. Thank you, Alvin. Thanks, everybody. Please, Dr. Fox.
Thank you. Hi, it's Judy. Hi, Community Board 4 members. I'm Judy Fox. I'm the head of Avenues New York and new to that position this year. But to give you a teeny bit of history, I've been connected with Avenues since 2013 when I was part of a team of visiting educators who conducted a quality review at the school's request And I remember back then feeling really impressed that a school that was in only its third year invited outsiders to come in and offer feedback about whether it was actually doing what it said it wanted to do. So that's what started me at Avenues. Then from 2015 to 17, I came back as the head of the upper division. And it was my privilege to participate in the first and second ever graduations. Last year, I was head of the lower division, so I've been a presence in the whole school. And last year, we, of course, embraced the challenge of in-person school all year during COVID. And this year, I'm lucky enough to be the head of school, which I very much appreciate. So I've seen Avenues grow and improve a good bit over the years, including our relationships with partners in the neighborhood. Morgan, whom you know, has very kindly introduced me to a number of neighborhood partners within CB4. The Fulton Houses, St. Clement's Food Pantry, Holy Apostle Soup Kitchen, Hudson Gill, the Elliott Chelsea Houses, Little Island, and even the High Line. Most recently, our students volunteered at a free community haunted house experience at Hudson Gill for Halloween. And our teachers and parents held a book fair across the street in partnership with the Elliott Chelsea Houses Tenants Association. And right now, literally right now, our Active Parents Association is working with our entire school to collect food donations for our annual Thanksgiving drive in conjunction with St. Clement's Food Pantry. So we feel really good about those kinds of neighborhood associations. This year, I will say school feels a little more normal because all the adults and older students are vaccinated. But I will add that the horror of COVID-19 continues to leave its mark on us. For example, to ensure the safety in our school, the youngest students who, as you know, aren't yet vaccinated are still confined to smaller pods with no mixing with other students in assemblies. As they would normally. We have only a limited number of spectator seats at indoor sporting events. We're not doing busing this year, and we have suspended our global travel programs, and parents are not able to visit the school during the day. But we are focusing on the silver linings, and we do have many of those. And upper division classes are pretty much normal, as they typically would be. We were able to remain open all last year, and we feel really good about the energy and even the commerce that came to the neighborhood from school activities. I know that our students love buying a slice after school at 10th Avenue Pizza, which is where I get my egg sandwich every morning. And we've been opening wide our cafeteria windows that look onto the High Line. And we've been holding pop-up musical events there for anybody who passes by with our musical groups. That's about it on my update with respect to the bigger picture of Avenues. Each of you should have received a copy of our report. I know now our Director of Community Engagement and Partnerships and new Associate Director of Enrollment, Morgan Jones, is ready to just run through that for you. And once he's finished with his remarks, both of us are happy to answer any of your questions. And I thank you for giving us your time. Morgan.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fox. Hi, everybody. Firstly, thank you again to Community Board Force ACES Committee for having us. It's great to see some familiar faces here on screen that I've worked with over the years. As Dr. Fox mentioned, my name is Morgan Jones, and I've been the Director of Community Engagement and Partnerships at Avenue since July of 2019. And as Dr. Fox mentioned, I also took on the additional role of Associate Director of Enrollment. Therefore, tonight, I am pleased to have the opportunity to share with you some highlights of our admissions, enrollment, financial aid efforts, as well as our service to our neighborhood through community engagement, all within Community Board 4. So I'll begin with some high-level updates on the admission, enrollment, and financial aid front. Over the past 8 years, since we've been tracking this data, Community Board 4 residents have been 29% more likely on average to be admitted to Avenues than those applicants who reside elsewhere. This year, Community Board 4 residents will comprise of 22% of our total student body, which is consistent with prior years. As some of you may know, Avenues offers generous financial aid that's entirely need-based. That means that we will offer financial aid to qualified students based on their demonstrated financial need and the need of the family and the availability of those funds. This financial aid is not a loan, but it is a grant that does not need to be paid back. For the current school year, 11 new financial aid awards were made to CB4 residents. This was offset by 6 graduating students compared to only 1 the previous year, as well as a few families that moved out of CB4 or even outside of New York due to COVID. The size of the average CB award to CB4 residents increased, including 2 new full awards for a first grade student and a 9th grade student from CB4. As you can see from the graph in the report, the total investment in financial aid to community board families has increased steadily year over year. The admissions and enrollment team, our team, has expanded our outreach by reaching out to the community about avenues. We do this by engaging multiple organizations to share any information and opportunities about our admissions and financial aid, including Community Board 4, the local New York City Housing Authority, NYCHA, Tenants Association, Hudson Guild, Prep for Prep, Oliver Scholars, and so a few more partner organizations. This past summer, I had the opportunity to attend multiple local block parties. I mean, we're now having block parties again this summer in light of everything. I actually seen a few of you at some of them. And I attended these to share information about avenues, as well as hosting a few webinars about helping people apply to avenues, and not just avenues, but just understand the independent school application process. And I want to thank Community Board 4 for sharing that in your newsletters as well too. Right now, we're currently in the midst of the admissions process for the 2022-2023 school year, and we encourage Community Board 4 residents to apply to avenues. So while we're proud in this growth in admissions and enrollment and financial aid awards since opening in 2012, alignment with our current students through community engagement activities that are connected to our mission is critical. So now I'm going to put on my other hat and share with you some highlights of our ongoing community engagement efforts. So firstly, we're really thankful to have such a strong relationship with Community Board 4. And Community Board 4's district manager, Jesse Bodine, has been a really integral resource for all of our efforts. Jesse has been generous with his time being a speaker with our students, a connector to other key Community Board 4 groups, including other nonprofits, businesses, city agencies, and having them speak with our students about what goes on in our community. He and his staff have been willing to share several career opportunities as well as public activities that have come from our school, and providing that through Community Board 4 bulletins this year. Also, I want to share a quick update too, that after our presentation to this very same committee last year, several members of this committee were really helpful to connect with our 7th graders. Some of you were a part of a community portrait project that we did, and we featured a few of you and some elected officials as well too from the community. And we actually posted on our Instagram page, so I'll make sure to share that with you. But we just want to thank you for being a part of that project. Another community engagement highlight is our continued strong relationship with our neighbors at the Elliott Chelsea houses. Some of you might know Ms. Waters there. Every fall and spring, Avenues, led by some of our faculty and staff members, we partner with the Elliott Chelsea houses to hold a free book fair to promote early literacy. So aside from distributing free books at the book fair, we give out hand sanitizer, masks, book bags, and other school supplies for free, all of us together. So this initiative began somewhere around the middle of 2020 as a means to connect with the community in a safe and socially distant way in light of the pandemic. And we've already held 4 of these so far. And the last one that we did was a little over a month ago. And we hope you can all attend the one in the spring, because we're already planning for that. While there are many, many more examples of community engagement opportunities, there's one in particular that I think that we all think brought our school together, our students, faculty, staff, and parents. And that was in partnership with the Hudson Guild. The Hudson Guild has a Adopt a Family program. And so this program provides toys, games, learning materials, and more to help families thrive during the winter. And so Avenue's community members got to know the names of these families and their wishes for the winter holiday season. And our school provided about support to about 182 families last year. And we plan on partnering again with the Hudson Guild this holiday season on that really meaningful opportunity. So our work in the community is ongoing in many small ways. We actually had a 12th grade class attend the community board's last social justice meeting, actually, a few weeks ago, to learn about the power of activism. Some second grade faculty members connected with the Hudson River Parks education staff members to do a study about marine life in the river a few weeks ago. Our upper grades, as Dr. Fox mentioned, our upper grades food and hunger awareness club, we're partnering with the St. Clement's Food Pantry and doing our 8th annual Thanksgiving food drive. And so there's so many different current opportunities that are happening where our students, staff, and faculty members are actively seeking and making meaningful connections within the community. So I made an ask last year, and I'd like to propose another ask that's come our way. And so I want to leave you with that ask. So through their world course class, some of our 8th graders are studying about the Constitution. And as one of their projects, they are going to examine the Constitution through the lens of many local, national, and global key issues. And so these issues include climate, immigration, human rights, government, and culture. So if any of you might be interested in partnering with some of our 8th graders, either as a mentor, or if you have an organization that works directly on these issues, please let me know. And I'm more than happy to connect you with our faculty that's working on this course. So again, we thank you for your time and partnership. And if you have, as Dr. Fox mentioned, if you have any questions, Dr. Fox and I are happy to take any questions from the committee here. So thank you.
Thank you, Avenues team. We'll take questions in the order that I see them. Looks like Katie has her hand up. You can go ahead and go first, Katie.
Thanks. And thanks for such a great presentation. And it sounds like you guys are doing extraordinary work in the neighborhood. And, you know, it's a benefit to all of us, right? So that's awesome. I did have a question. You mentioned the statistics about the number of students you have from our district attending the school. And it sounds like it's a little over 20%. And I wondered, and you said that there are also career opportunities. I wondered if you have any people on staff from our district.
Yes, we do have people on staff from our district. I don't have the exact numbers from it, but we definitely do in different areas that live within the district. Absolutely. And in different areas, be it that they're on our faculty and staff or they work in other areas from our campus service team. So we do have those as well. And we're actively looking in the community as well, too. So I believe recently I did share some private care opportunities that we posted onto the bulletin with CB4 and with the speaker's office as well. So always actively looking within our community since we're just right there. So, yeah.
There aren't any other questions. I do have one question. Dr. Fox, you mentioned in a variety of ways how challenging this year has been. I'm just curious from a staff retention standpoint, how your community is faring. Burnout, exhaustion are huge problems at schools and school systems around the country, including here in New York City.
Yeah, thank you for that question. As soon as I put water on myself from my burnout, I'll answer. No, just kidding. It's challenging. It's tough. The teachers feel a tremendous responsibility for keeping the kids safe and a tremendous worry for keeping themselves and their families safe. As you know, I'm sure in your areas of operation, you find the same things. We have had modest turnover. I would guess, if I had to, in part because of COVID, because we, I think, did a very credible job last year and built some good, positive optimism within our community about our commitment to doing what it took to keep them safe. But it's hard. The upper division, I think, is feeling a little bit better than the lower division in the early learning center, because they are mixing among one another and it feels more normal. I see Morgan nodding his head, so because he's around the school a lot and sees what happens. So thank you for the question and the acknowledgement. We are hopeful. We like to do things with humor and energy, and the Parents Association are marvelous at giving our faculty and staff treats every now and then, and just some recognition that they too are grateful that we're keeping school.
Looks like Jessica might have a question before we wrap things up.
Sure, thank you, Kit, and thank you, Dr. Fox and Morgan, for the presentation. My question, I was really, I enjoyed seeing the trends around scholarship and how the overall pool has grown, how the award amount has grown. Obviously, tuition, no doubt, has also grown in the last 10 years. And so I was just hoping you could speak to, there are the number of kids who receive tuition, a scholarship, which is great. What's your experience in terms of kids, both from the district and not, who find that even with the scholarship that's offered for them, that it's not enough for them to say yes to go to Avenues, and what kind of activities are done or with your committees, or like, how do you think about that? And if you have any numbers to share on that, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Morgan, I can take a crack at it unless you have something at your fingertips.
You can go first, Dr. Fox,
Yeah,
and
okay.
then maybe I'll follow up. Mhm.
Interestingly, neither Morgan nor I are part of the financial aid deliberations. Those are incredibly confidential. There are those families, and there have been at every school in which I've been, where the school tries to disseminate the financial aid funds, and we have something near $15 million that we disseminate. It's not inconsiderable. And we try to disseminate those in ways that will maximize the number of families who can attend. But you also, the tension is making sure that you give a great deal of support to those families whose resources are so limited that they couldn't even approach contributing anything, which is why Morgan, I think, fairly proudly pointed to 2 full scholarships, which is something rare for all of our families. We seldom give full scholarships. Well, they're not scholarships, they're financial aid grants. Forgive me for that slip. What we do, how we operate, or how most schools operate, is we work with the family. We ask them to apply another year. We keep them on a wait list. It's not always that we can accommodate all of the families, or that they can accept us even with the offers that we provide. I don't know if that's what you were after, but it's all I got for the moment.
Yeah, I mean, that's, yeah, I think it's, in any, like, it's always good to have data, but sometimes the data that we don't have is also very telling. And so, the kids that didn't, it would be interesting to also start tracking how many kids you offered something to and still couldn't accept. And for us I think it would be interesting, but also just for your school, for your community, to know how much more it needs to do to ensure that, the right amount of funds are there, but also all the wraparound supports that you want to be able to provide any students who receive those grants. So just something to think about for the future, but thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Jesse, do you want to go next, or does it make sense to take Leslie's question and then you can close us out?
I defer to Leslie.
Mine's not a
Leslie, all you.
question. Thank you. Mine's not a question, just a comment. Well, 2 comments. Dr. Fox, I can attest, Morgan is all over the place. I see him everywhere. So he's doing a good job. The second, a comment is, I really appreciate you guys being here, because I don't know if people realize you're a for-profit business school. And you are under no obligation to share with us, to come here. to, you know, open up your, you know, your programs or anything. In fact, I think, and Jesse, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you're the only private school that does that in our district. I don't remember being on ACES and having any other private schools come and do that. So I just want to say that is really, really appreciated, considering your location and considering how, you know, the juxtaposition of you guys and our public schools here. I think it's really important, and I definitely recognize it and appreciate it.
Thank you. Could I just jump in and offer a little postscript to the for-profit thing? It comes up quite a lot. It feels like the bottom line is what matters in the school. So I'm fond. I don't have the board of directors authority to do this, or the president's, but I do it anyway. And I say that it is simply a tax status. For-profit as opposed to not-for-profit. For most of my private school career, which is since 2001, I've worked in schools that have been traditional independent schools. They have endowments, they raise money every year. When you have an endowment, you are constrained by how much for how much you're allowed to spend. The post-Enron Sarbanes-Oxley regulations apply also to the nonprofit world. And one could never invest the quantity of money that was required to start avenues with that model. You couldn't raise that kind of money. The building alone, I'm told, back then when they first did it, which is what now, 11 years ago when they did the building, was $85 million to rehab that building. So we needed visionaries and investors who were not looking for a profit tomorrow, I assure you. And these same folks have opened campuses in Sao Paulo, in Shenzhen, and now they're opening up in Silicon Valley. So the for-profit thing, there's nobody making a big profit and going off to the Bahamas on that money. They're reinvesting it. And we feel really privileged that we have such generous investors. Well, that rendered everybody speechless.
I think you're the last man standing.
So I was going to say one thing, but Leslie raised something. I just, for clarity's sake, and it's been a long time, so I understand maybe there's a slight miscommunication, not understanding it. I mean, I agree with everything mostly Leslie said about appreciating avenues coming here, but I do want to bring for the point of information, this relationship really stemmed from a series of land use actions that avenues, when they started, required. And we, in our negotiations with those actions, you know, created a memorandum of understanding and a set of commitments that we were requesting of avenues. And what Leslie is right on completely is that avenues, I think in my mind, has met those commitments on a yearly basis and has made sure that they have come and presented, even when those numbers were not where we all wanted them to be. And they've gotten better. So I will say that. So, but I do want to understand that this came out of a hard fought set of land use actions and negotiations, you know, with that ended probably just as I started on the board. So it's been a while. But I just always I said this last year and I'll say it again. I'll just say, you know, when the chaos of COVID was at its highest, and everybody was hunkering down wherever they were hunkering down and trying to figure out how to do things and what to do. One of the few islands of stability and responsiveness as to what can we do, how can we help, was avenues in our district. And I will just say that, you know, Morgan and his team were there to help kids in shelters, and our temporary shelters in our district, getting them games and books to keep people entertained and engaged during the time when they couldn't go to school. they were involved in getting cleaning supplies to nonprofit organizations, housing development companies, some of them that you know because they are involved on this board in some way. PPE to the EMS station, the local EMS station, and the EMS workers union. So those were, it was every time we had a new need or issue, food as well, lots of food. I'm sorry, I forgot the food thing. So good that one of the people once called me back and said, I've never had such good food to give to my clients. So, it's, so I'll just say that. I just want to highlight that again, and I'll probably highlight that until I'm much older. So, but it was a real special relationship that we could have. And, it speaks to Morgan, and it speaks to Avenue's attitude about what they can do. So thank you. That's it.
Thank you for your gracious remarks, Jesse. Thank you.
All right. I don't see any more questions from the committee, and it doesn't look like anyone in the public is raising their hand. Dr. Fox, great to meet you. Morgan, always nice to see you. Thank you for coming back. We'll see you same time, same place next year, it sounds like. But we really do.
Not before then.
If not before then. The outsized role that your institution has in our district for an institution of its type, it's definitely something that folks notice. And we hope that it continues. Hopefully you will not be called upon in the way that you were last year anytime in the foreseeable future. But thank you for everything that you've done.
It's our pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night. Thanks.
Thank you. Have a good night. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right. Next on the agenda is, what do we want to do in the next year? So this conversation started in a couple different ways. Number one, by Alan sending out the communication that we would love to hear from the subcommittees on where they'd each like to focus, dig in, and what that might consist of during our meeting tonight. And then different subcommittees have had different sidebar conversations. This can be relatively informal, but we'll try to make sure that we all get out of here at a decent time of night. I think we can start with the back of the acronym and work our way to the forward. So go street life, and then education, and then arts and culture. And so if the folks who are sort of heading up one of the subgroups could kick things off, and then other folks in the subgroup could sort of chime in, I think it would just be helpful to hear from as many folks as possible. Alan, anything in terms of framing or considerations that you wanted to make sure you shared with the group before we turn it over to Blake?
No, I think he's got quite a list of possibilities. I did want to ask one thing as Blake, as you go through your presentation, the newsletter boxes that you worked on, and with transportation also. If there's an update on that, or is that kind of like an issue we try to poke a little bit and just, we're moving on from that and leaving it alone. So if you have any thoughts on that, I appreciate it. Be good to hear about that. Thanks.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Kit and Alan. So on the street life side, we had an email going with some ideas, but would love to hear any others. And I think Sabrina, as well as David, had some comments on some of the list items as well. So, a lot of them had been discussed in the context of our budget discussion, where there's still, I think major issues with the basket pickup, the residential trash pickup, based on funding cuts that were part of the COVID cuts last year and had never been fully reinstated. I think some of the other areas that we had worked on, but had not necessarily seen to fruition, are the containerized trash, where we had gotten an update from CheckPeds pilot project, but I think could do more to follow up and see what the results were. Are we doing containerized trash tests in other parts of the city or parts of our neighborhood where there might be some learnings there? I think the news racks are something where we provided some recommendations on regulation changes, but need to follow up both in terms of auditing the condition of the news racks in the neighborhood, especially as some publications may have discontinued during the past 18 months, as well as to follow up on if any of those regulation changes had been made. I think some of the other areas that we had discussed but not really, maybe had a letter on are the snow issue alongside transportation, where there was in the sidewalk survey there was some major concerns about bus stops and sidewalk snow. We had discussed a bit about 311 in the past year, where both at a micro level where certain kinds of issues are difficult to report, as well as on a broader level, some of the user interfaces, I think might leave something to be desired, especially among people who might be a little less familiar with technology. I think something else that maybe we hadn't addressed, but I think would be nice to address in the coming year is noise, which tends to be, one of the, if not the top 311 reported issue. And, I think that's something where we would work with transportation as well on the vehicular noise component, but I think there are other areas of that noise issue that we could look into further. We'd love to pass it over as well to Sabrina and David, who might be jumping on a little later as well, since they had some thoughts on these areas as well.
I mean, to me, it's just an observation and based on what I see, especially in 8th Avenue, which I know 8th Avenue, it's a combination of the bid of Times Square and like some sort of the budget that comes from the cleaning there, but it's not great. And it's, the budgets have been established and established for some of the cases, and it's still a problem. And like today we celebrated great news. International travels are back again. And gosh, our city, and especially our district, is not great. So I just want to know more about like what is being reestablished, what is not, and where are we coming out short.
Yeah, that's a great point, Sabrina. I know, thinking about all the people who travel to the city, for the marathon, and it's embarrassing that in our city, the greatest in the world, we have just these huge piles of trash on the sidewalk. And maybe we could take something of a similar outreach approach, like we did with the news racks, to look at the specific areas that maybe trash continues to pile up, and try to provide that feedback, to DSNY.
That could be a good strategy. I don't know. I mean, DSNY they presented when? That was in July. Did they mention when they're going to have their, because I know it was a timeline, but I don't know I can't remember if all that has been started,
Yeah, and I think it really is a budgetary issue as well, since DSNY, I think, is just doing a great job with the kind of funding that they got. But for example, just with the basket pickup trucks, we went from 2 routes to 1. And so of course service levels are going to be half as good or twice as bad, whichever way you look at it. So it's really, I think, appealing to the consul, the mayor's office, to make sure that these issues are prioritized, as well as, I think, doing what we can to identify, particularly problematic areas that might put kind of a face to the overall issue.
Yeah. Those are my comments. I think we need to look deeper into this, because it should not be happening.
Alan, was there something you wanted to throw out there?
Yeah, I have a question. Maybe Jesse can answer this. In terms of the routes, in terms of the pickups, Are there two different garages that work, either Chelsea and Hell's Kitchen, or is it all one, or does everything come out of one garage?
You mean in terms of residential and basket?
Yeah, in terms of the routes, because as much as
Everything comes out of one garage.
yeah, because as much as I walk around the city and I see these baskets overflowing, and everybody can certainly attest to that, I'm finding here where we live here along 10th Avenue, 22nd, 23rd, I'm seeing empty baskets. I'm seeing more pickups. I was just wondering if for some reason, the routes have shifted, or the number of pickups has shifted, because Sunday, I was out there, there was a truck came by, the baskets weren't even half full when they were emptying them out. So over the course of the last, I don't know, maybe within the last 2 months at least, or month and a half, I've seen a remarkable change on the corners along 10th Avenue. I don't know, I can't speak for 9th Avenue. I just don't happen to notice that. But I was just wondering if there's something going on in terms of the routing and the scheduling or something like that. So that's, I'm just throwing that out as something to ask maybe, at some point in time.
Sure. Yeah, no, everything comes out of the same garage. Everything should be being picked up generally at this, at the same level. So it's not as though one area is getting more pickups than another area. They're just, it does matter if how the route is set. Obviously, if the truck is full, then that might make a difference. But I don't know. So we could certainly put that down as a follow-up question when we have DSNY attend.
Yeah. As far as Blake, you asked about the possible pilot program. Being on CheckPeds, I know that there is a pilot program coming up. I think it's the beginning of the year. We had the letter supporting CheckPeds corral proposal. Sanitation has taken that, and they're working off of that proposal, I think enhancing it in some ways and having somebody create a design aspect for that. So, but there is a pilot program coming up, and I think it's going to be in Hell's Kitchen at first, but probably not until sometime in the beginning of the year.
Yeah, that might be a good one. So, I don't know if CheckPeds is proposing locations within a neighborhood, but I do think that, maybe DSNY has been putting up not containerized trash containers, but just corrals for some of the residential trash in some areas on 8th Avenue. And, I don't know if that's an official program or if it's just organically coming up, but even with something like that, I think there could be some learnings, get some feedback from the businesses in the area about how well it's working.
Yeah, so I'm just curious, are these enclosed corrals, or are they just putting the bags out in the street?
Yeah, it's just bags out on the street in a barricaded area, on the street.
So it is closed off with cones or something, or how are they barricading it? Just curious.
It's just metal barricades. I'm not sure if it's, the police ones or not, but, maybe they just got moved there.
Because I'm seeing the organic aspect of it, where especially the larger buildings, they just, if there's a couple of empty spots in front of their building, they'll take that street over, and they just to clear the sidewalk. So I think that's happening as you use the word organically. So maybe that'll catch on somehow. But thank you very much.
Yeah. So it sounds like maybe looks like Katie has a question.
Yeah, but let me just say, I think this could totally not be the right place to raise this question, so I have no idea. But, we hear a lot about quality of life issues are sort of top of the roster with a lot of community members. And I'm just not sure which committee is addressing those, but I was just wondering, as we're talking about sort of street issues, would this be the right place to be thinking about some of the quality of life issues that we're hearing about from our community, or is it a different place? Sorry for my ignorance.
No, it's a really good question that I'm not sure has a super crisp answer. Jesse and Alan definitely jump in here and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the response is it depends what the quality of life issue is. We as a board have deliberately chosen not to focus on certain topics where we don't have influence or sort of power, which in some cases other community boards have a committee that's focused on a certain issue. And some of those fall under the quality of life umbrella. And so there's, I think, some overlap in the street life and transportation categories, as Blake was alluding to, in terms of something like trash piling up, in terms of some of the other sort of like cleanliness issues that the city is experiencing right now. I'm not sure they have an official home. And so we can talk about them, and as needed, Jesse can sort of direct us to collaborate with transportation or other committees where that's needed. How did I do, Jesse?
Yeah. So you're touching on, Katie, is the kind of historical nature of this committee. This committee has taken on many different titles and focuses over the years. It was a quality of life committee many years ago. It then became a quality of life and public safety committee, and then it kind of morphed into sort of back to just quality of life, and it became solely about bad actors in the bar and restaurant world. And then it's sort of now its newest rebirth is this committee. So the issue I always have with quality of life stuff is that many times I think it's stuff that does not fit within the cycle of a community board's recommendation, cycle. I think that's not always true. I think large scale issues can always be discussed and we can make recommendations. But in terms of the trash not being picked up at the right time, in terms of trying to find a restaurant that would be willing to do an adopt a basket program, in terms of public safety issues, which sort of are more immediate, right? You want them not to be, maybe the broader issue of funding for that specific thing, whether it's officers or patrol cars or training or whatever, that could be discussed in the committee. But I think many times I find that quality of life stuff, it doesn't really meet the immediacy of it, doesn't really meet the what the board is actually set up to do, in my opinion. So that doesn't mean we can't discuss it. You guys you're more than welcome to discuss it. But like a noisy construction site, no one wants to hear it's going to take 45 days for us to write a letter about a noisy construction site, right? They want me to call, the developer, they want me to call DOB, and we should do that right now, right? And so it's sort of duplicative to do that, unless we're talking about, like we say, noise as a policy. Noise is, that's something different. So I do think maybe looking at some of the stuff that I know Jessica's working on from the survey that's going to be coming out, I think looking at the 311s and seeing getting a broader understanding as a committee of those, what the difficulties are with those complaints and why they're so high, and what that is, and basing off that, coming up with recommendations. That on general policy ideas, I think that's a more effective way of using your time.
That's what I was,
than having like a block association come and complain about a particular building. That,
Right. And I guess that's what I was thinking. We hear that they're like, oh, quality of life. But I think we need to sort of drill down and have a better understanding of what those quality of life issues are, that maybe there are some that we could help address. And you're right, from the information, maybe Jessica, that you're getting, and we may be able to sort of drill down on that a little bit. I will say, I happened to be in my local deli on 7th Avenue and heard some people all saying like, oh my gosh, you know, we've never seen such bad graffiti everywhere. It's just awful. And then I remember like, okay, well, that was an issue that we'd sort of addressed a little bit. And I don't know if that's something we should address more of, right? Because it's clearly something that is weighing down on people. And I think that's one of the things that is probably a quality of life concern that maybe we, I don't know, could do something about, and talking to the police group or whatever that is addressing graffiti. So anyway, those are my thoughts. Thanks.
I would just say one more thing on that. I think it's great to focus, spend time on it. Policy stuff, I agree. I think if there's certain initiatives that we think that need to be funded that haven't been funded, like the graffiti free program from New York that used to be in place and hasn't been because of the budget cuts. I think advocating for those things is good and all that. I will just recommend that I think you guys have got a great set of topics in this current design of this committee. And I think I just be careful. Quality of life is very broad and it can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. And then all of a sudden you're opening yourself up to a whole nother thing. Well, I think right now what you've got is actually very specific and very helpful and very direct and meets a need. And so I would just say that's fine to do work on it. I just don't know if we want to, and I'm not saying you're suggesting this, Katie. I'm just saying like in terms of just like taking on quality of life and making it more of a part of the committee as a title or something along those lines. It can spiral into whole areas that it took a while for us to get out of.
I think to Katie's point, we left the graffiti issue with the prospect of the new city core to help with graffiti removal, but we could follow up on that to see have they actually deployed some of the new staff on those teams toward graffiti removal, and if not, then is there really that need for that graffiti-free NYC program to come back? Since I see the same thing, just a ton of graffiti in Hell's Kitchen.
Great, thanks.
Like, I wonder if we could get, I don't know if this is worth chasing down, but that program partnered with nonprofit agencies to hire those folks to do the beautification projects, which I know from other nonprofit providers, they've been very liberal about what beautification means. And it would be interesting though to see if any CB4, like any work is being done in this district. Did they contract with any nonprofits? Doesn't mean if they're not in the district, they're not deployed here, but that could at least be a start to see who is working with them.
I think that's a great idea.
Can I keep going? Great. I was going to mention the survey that we have these results. Just to remind folks, the first question was this very broad, rank your 3 categories. And then number 2 was be as specific as you can with the issue you're concerned about as it relates to a budget request. And while 450 people completed the survey, very few people were able to answer that question in the way that would really get us to a policy level kind of discussion, as opposed to just like rats, crime. So I will, as promised, be sending out those lists to the chairs, and I think it's worth looking at. But I agree with Jesse, like trying to differentiate between like someone's lived experience and what this means for policy and what we're going to do about it is like going to really require like intellectual capital behind that, like muscle, to try to extrapolate that. But I hope to have that in the next week or so. But speaking of rats, I did just want to mention that I think that's been a real issue. And the New York Times wrote a really good article, I thought, about the problem. And as it relates to, which was going to be my third point, which is like so many of these issues are so interrelated with transportation and even BLP wanting to talk about open restaurants and all of those things. And so I think if we could come up with a list of things we at least want to discuss and have some joint meetings, I don't know if Jesse, those are impossible to try to get on the calendar, but or how we would do that. But it's just, I think there's like a lot of shared interest in these topics and figuring out how we can, I think we might be quicker to get to policy recommendations if we join with other groups than just saying like, rats. So those are my few thoughts.
Cool.
So I think we should probably move on to education. I'll just say quickly, I've seen a lot of rats. And so I think we should talk about that in some way, shape, or form. And I think, Jessica, your suggestion is a good one. I also just wonder about, we sometimes bring in folks to like educate us. There's someone who is married to a colleague of mine who's a professor, actually studies rats. He was quoted in that New York Times article. He seems like a totally normal guy. He just studies rats.
My husband says that I'm obsessed with rats. He said it's like the second most talked about thing that I have in my life. So I'm very eager to meet your colleague's husband.
I wonder if he and maybe a couple of other folks could be just beneficial to bring in to like walk us through what are effective programs in New York and other places. I'm guessing one of the things that we'll hear is, as long as we're piling trash on the streets and recycling on the streets, we're probably not going to make meaningful progress on our road initiative. But that's just a suspicion. So that could be another thing that we potentially think about in the street life bucket. Cool. Sounds like there's a lot of topics that are rich for discussion, some of which are disgusting. Let's move on to education. I'm sorry. Education. Katie, Leslie, Mercedes, curious to hear thoughts on where should we be either doubling down or opening up new areas of focus.
I'll jump in first, but I feel like, and I may be becoming a bit of a broken record, but especially with a whole new administration coming in shortly, I think it would be really great if we could identify what are the key issues to our parents in our district and be able to advocate about that and be able to present it, just as data points to new folks coming in. I think it would be really lovely. So I really would love us to be able to do the outreach and to do a survey to see if we can get as many parents as possible to answer the questions. And we talked about doing the survey, that would be one for lower school parents, elementary, one for middle school, and one for upper school. And just the second issue, I'd really like to hear more about, but I don't know if this is the right place, but presumably there's all this extra money, and I don't think we've actually heard many details about what extra money is coming into our district, into our schools, and how it's being used. And I think that that's something that all of us would benefit from learning more about.
Mercedes, do you want to get in and then we can go to Alan?
Okay. Yeah, no, as a parent, what I can share so far this year is that with the middle school process, we're starting to actually get information about tours and actually in-person tours. So that's kind of good for parents because parents really appreciate being able to go into the building. And we're also seeing that the younger kids are getting vaccinated at different sites, including schools. So I know our school is hosting this coming Friday. So it'd be great to see how many kids actually get vaccinated at school, because one of the biggest things is the younger kids not being vaccinated. So their experience is very different than what the Avenue's older kids, right? Where they're vaccinated and are able to do certain activities. So it's, it'd be great to see how many kids actually get vaccinated so that they could experience a different, a closer to normal school experience. So those are two things that are top of mind for parents right now. Every parent I've run into has been talking about vaccinating their kids this week. So it'd be, great to see what actually happens in the next month, if the school experiences, if you're going to have less classroom closures and things that, would make life in elementary school a bit more normal for them. So I think those are the two priorities for parents right now, like either getting their child vaccinated or like being able to figure out what's happening for the next school year as far as like applying, because I think we still are not where they're using a Rubik's for, I think it's still the same process as last year, from what I understand.
Thanks for that, Mercedes. Very quickly, I'll just throw in my own 2 cents on the vaccination at schools. I think it's a real accomplishment by the DOE. That's how that process is being handled. It's not necessarily true around the country, that kids are able to get vaccinated at their public school. And so, for parents who have been stretched in so many different directions, the fact that it's not a separate appointment or at the pediatrician or going to the Javits Center and missing half a day of work, like I think it's a really big deal. So just want to shout out the DOE on that move. Alan, you had your hand up. Was there something you wanted to throw in as well on education?
Yeah. Thank you. Referring back to the survey that we sent out, out of the 450 responses that we got, I believe about only 30 or 31 people responded that education was a priority for them. I thought that was a little disappointing, surprising and disappointing. And it's reflected in the statement of district needs in terms of what we've been asking, or what we're asking for in terms of budgeting for our schools. So my question really is, how do we raise the level of interest in education in our district, where people come out and say this is an important issue? It's not like a crime statistic that if you put more cops on the beat, the crime statistic goes down and people are happy about it. In my mind, if you don't address a lot of these issues that parents have, that educators have, you can't, like next year or the year after, and I'm not speaking as an educator, just somebody who listens to what goes on. You can't say, okay, next year we'll try to fix what we didn't do the year before, because you've lost that year, and it's the kids that don't get the benefit of it. So I don't think there's a good plan or something we could really do to raise that level at this point, but I think it's something we should be thinking about. Maybe we need to do some more panels that we did, or get some more educators out into the open to speak about what they need. In some way, the panels that we had were excellent panels that were very interesting. They drew a lot of attention. Maybe that brings media attention to the system. Again, a lot of this is going to depend on who the administrators are going into the new year. But I think I found it pretty disappointing that education got such a poor turnout. So that's basically the comment. I didn't want to, be negative about it. I think it shows how sometimes perception. I think sometimes perception of an issue drives it. Drives the issue to a certain prominence, and education just doesn't seem to be getting it. So, thanks.
Before we go to Leslie, Jessica, you looked like you were going to say something about numbers. Was there something about the survey that you just wanted to add more context on before we go to a different person?
Thank you, Kit. I was just thinking, I think a survey is a great tool, and 400 plus respondents is excellent, but it's also a function of who saw the survey, who took the time to complete the survey. And I don't know if anyone on this committee took the time to share it out to their principal contacts or their PTA schools or any of the knock-on networks that could help shape the kinds of feedback we get. And so again, I'm not trying to undermine the results that we have. Like, we sent it out to various lists. The board office sent it out. I personally forwarded it in some cases. But who we actively want, we have a hand in shaping the kinds of responses we get. So both for this committee and anyone else for that matter. And so I think we should just think about that the next time. Also, it was a very brief survey. And so I wouldn't have even necessarily wanted to put all our muscle behind this one, except for the fact, I suppose, that it did influence our statement of district needs, which is pretty important. But, if we want to do a more robust survey, I don't know, maybe Jesse's kicking me under the table, but I feel like, that's the kind of thing that we would, be wise to do if that's the kind of feedback we want to make sure we secure.
Can we go to Leslie next, Jesse, or is there something really specific to it? Okay, cool. Leslie.
I think moving forward, these are all good ideas. I think we have to decide what we want to accomplish, though, as a committee. I think our committees on CB4 have a little bit, they work a little differently. Some are very action oriented and they have very specific asks and they push for those asks. And then they have speakers on, those asks, and some are more, philosophical, maybe, I don't know. So I feel like with this conversation, we might be going towards philosophical, like with survey, I don't know. I'll let you guys tell me if I'm right or wrong on that. But I would like to, instead of surveys, I think we all, we can connect with PTA. We know PTAs, right? We know the parents of we know the PTA leaders. We know the people who are involved. I think if we want to be more effective, I think we have more of a contact with the PTAs in our district. Now, I know that kind of excludes high schools because they don't really have active PTAs like the younger ones do and the junior highs do. But the PTAs have a really good finger on the pulse of their school, as do the principals. That would be my first suggestion, because I think Jessica hit the nail on the head. I think with surveys, it's kind of like it's going to be the same people who kind of put back the surveys to us or those who are involved. Second thing is, third thing, I think there are specific asks for education. It's if we want to get into it. Do we want to explore teaching assistants? Why aren't teaching assistants funded? Boom. Are we going to go gung ho on that and make it, and make it be an ask and talk about it? What do we feel about, baseline arts education? There is no baseline, dance education. What do we feel about that? Boom. So are we going to be action and ask for these things, or at least demand a response or of why they're not included in our schools? It depends what we want. I personally, I like the action oriented items. If we're going to discuss I think teaching assistants is a huge, huge deal in our public schools. It's a really big deal right now. And unfortunately, they're not funded. I'm sorry, they're not publicly funded by the schools at DOE. That's one thing. So it depends what, how you guys want to, I guess, craft our objective or objectives.
Just to make sure that I understand, when you say teaching assistants aren't funded, what exactly do you mean by that, Leslie?
So teaching, I'm talking mostly because we don't need teaching assistants normally in the upper grades, but teaching assistants are, there's a teacher, and we all know classrooms are overcrowded, right? Or most people agree that there's too many kids in a class. So they have a teaching assistant. Depending on how the schools, DOE does not pay for that teaching assistant. They don't give a teaching assistant, is what I'm saying. They don't provide any TAs. So if your school wants one, then you have to raise the money to get it, or you have to have some sort of public-private relationship. Or I think Josephine had the example that I think her former school, I think, had a had a relationship with a higher education teaching, right, Mercedes? And they got it from there. I know PS 33 parents had to raise the money and pay for it out of their pocket. So I think these are some issues that I know I would be interested in tackling as far as DOE. If we're getting all this money, why don't, where are we going with teaching assistants? How come there's nothing in the budget for, dance education or music or any of this stuff? And this is all funded by parents. It's all funded by private donations for our public schools. I mean, like I said, there are a few public-private relationships that work. But unfortunately, some of these are kind of hit or miss depending on what school you're at.
Okay, that's helpful. I was asking that question from a place of principal gets a budget, principal gets to make decisions about how to use that budget. And in some cases can prioritize teaching assistants, in other cases can opt not to. But I'm not sure I fully understand the suggestion of baselining teaching assistants because different principals are making different discretionary choices there.
That's what I'm saying. This is just you guys could disagree with me. I don't think it should be a discretionary choice. I think it should be provided for them baseline. I don't think they should have to, let's go with independent, let's go with religious, let's go with public schools. The other two baseline teaching assistants, right? They're baselined. What they do with, and yes, it's different because there's no really discretionary funding there from school to school. It's a little different. But I know, Mercedes, correct me if I'm wrong. Because with your school might be different than PS 33 or PS or some other ones in Chelsea as well, where, they were asking, when we were doing budget a few years ago, they were asking us for like libraries, like literally updating libraries. They were asking PTA to fund updated libraries because, Kit, I think they're just, when you say discretionary budget, it's used by the main things, like the teacher, the main chunks are used by their budget. Then when it comes to yoga or dance or that never gets in, and teaching assistants usually aren't in there or fall under that umbrella.
I think I get what you're saying. I think my bigger point was at a building level, principals have a lot of discretion for what they're going to invest in and what they're not. Talking about what one school was fundraising for might not be an illustrative way of saying this is what all schools need or do not need. Let's go to, I think it was Katie and then Mercedes.
Oh, thanks. Just in response to what Leslie was just saying, I totally agree. I'm much more interested in being action oriented. I just want to make sure that we are being action oriented in a way that is responsive to the specific needs and interests of our parents. And I think the way to do that is to ask our parents specifically. And as you said, I think absolutely we need to reach out to our PTA connections and say, hey, here's this 4-question questionnaire. Would you be able to send it out to all the parents at your school for us? Because we'd like to hear from everybody. But if that just is too impossible, or then at least we could ask the people on the PTAs, I guess, to do it. But I think it would really be great if we could say, you know what, we actually reached out and we got responses from 200 parents in our district or 300, whatever the number is. Just again, so that we can be very specifically action oriented in the ways that they've identified.
Mercedes?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to Leslie. So what we have is student teachers that are brought in from different schools. So it's programs. We also had it down in Tribeca too, when my older daughter was in school down there. So it's usually student teachers, and it's relationships developed with the schools where they, the teachers come and do a period of time, but not really assistance. are you referring to paras? Because I know sometimes when kids are younger, they have like para teachers. So I just wanted clarification from Leslie about that.
No, paras are specific to each student.
Okay.
That's like you apply for that if you think your kid is, if your kid needs it. And I think the para goes with the kid through the grade levels or until they don't need it. This is more the philosophy of more teachers in a classroom for the ratio.
Okay, because didn't we have a presentation about they're thinking about making the classroom smaller, right? So didn't we have that this year, like a presentation where it was talked about smaller classroom sizes for New York, Kit?
I think we heard from folks who are affiliated with Class Size Matters, and that's their big thing is shrink class sizes. I don't think it was something the DOE at any point indicated that they were focused on.
Okay, because yeah, that would mean that the budget would be for more teachers, right? And I think right now the focus, at least at our school, is that there have been more social workers hired to deal with things that are, from the pandemic. So I think a lot of the money that has come in has been to hire more people for social work and social workers and psychologists, I think mostly.
Just really quickly, the terms that we're using can mean very different things in different contexts. Para, assistant teacher. And so I think it's just helpful to clarify that. There can be a para who is one-to-one with a single student. More commonly though, a para is working with multiple students who have different learning needs that the para is supporting in. Sometimes that's through pushing into classrooms, sometimes it's pulling out a group of students or a student. But they're not necessarily working just with one student all day, and most commonly they're not doing that. Assistant teacher can mean very different things from school to school, and a student teacher is someone who's still on track to get a degree and a license, so enrolled in a university with an ed program. All three sort of are under the umbrella of non-licensed instructional staff, and again, going back to this like principal discretion thing, different school systems and different school buildings make different decisions about how to use their budget to use people in those three categories to bring down the student teacher ratio.
Kit, I think what Mercedes was referencing when she said para, I'm guessing Mercedes is the IEPs. The IEPs is the one that's one-on-one. That goes innate.
It's not necessarily, Leslie.
IEPs?
Well,
IEPs are individualized, they individualized educational. All I know is because I know a few friends who they love getting into the program because once you get one, and it's very, very, almost very difficult to get one, but once you get one, it stays with you until you let that.
Having been in many IEP meetings, I'll just say that it does not necessarily mean that you get a one-to-one para. It's determined by the specific learning needs of your student, which may or may not involve you getting para assistance at all. What the interventions are going to be dictated by the learning difference of a student. Jesse?
I just want to touch base on some of the things that went around, we're sort of going around with. I agree with Leslie that I think the PTAs, it's clear to me that we do not, as a board, I'm saying individually and maybe not even as a subgroup, but as a board collectively, I don't think we have a strong relationship with PTAs. And that's, I think PTAs, people change in PTAs, we could have a strong relationship and then it changes, so I think if we want to make this, I think the survey is a great idea. It's a good way. I agree with Katie. It gives us a baseline of what we're talking about. It gives us a backing when we when we take DOE to task or SCA to task or something else to task. We have that data and that's helpful. But I do think getting that to the right people to answer is important. So I and again, the office is just tell me what to do and we'll do it. You know, I will put a survey out. We'll schedule meetings. I think maybe first step being, or one of the first steps being maybe doing offline, briefings, trying to find some time with PTA leaders. I know there's parents that got normal jobs. It's difficult, but I think we've done this for a few months where we opened up our first item on our agenda to be sort of hoping that people would show up from the world of education to sort of hear what they have to say, and it hasn't happened. And so I think maybe being some targeted, whether it's official from me writing the email and asking for the meeting, or if it's something from the subgroup, and it doesn't matter to me. I have no stake in the game, but I think building the relationship and finding out, right, we do want to do a survey, how best to do it, how best to get those answers to the questions out to and get the answers back, rather than just relying on what we have so far, which I think does get us a lot in one way, but might not get us the same result, on a specific topic like education, right? So that's my suggestion. And the other one, before we get to arts and culture, because I do think I want to make sure, I'm sure you guys want to hit on it too, one thing that I realized with this committee is that we've got so much to deal with. It is hard to track. And I will say, transportation does anybody who's on transportation knows that they do a really good tracking way. They have a tracker basically of issues, of like, they have an issue, they've written a letter about it, they track it, it's in a spreadsheet. We're talking about Christine Berthet here, by the way, right? So queen of Excel spreadsheets, right? So it's got a line. It's got, okay, we've met with the agency here. We've progressed it to this point. We haven't heard a response yet. So unfortunately, I'm not volunteering myself to do all of that for y'all, but like, I do think we could break it up by subject, and therefore that would help us keep track of all of this stuff. Because I think we could do this almost every other month and have a whole new thing, and it's going to be difficult. So I would just recommend that. I mean, we can certainly just take the template from Christine or transportation, use it in some way, or build our own. But I think that it's going to help us keep track of where we are with these topics. And like I said, some of them will be very action oriented. We'll be very specific, and we want this, and how do we get it? And others will be, I think what Leslie's might be speaking to broader is like, where do we fall out on this topic, right? We're going to write a letter. We don't think just because we wrote a letter, the powers that be are going to change their entire philosophy, but we as a board feel X about affordable housing, right? We know where we feel about affordable housing. We know where we feel about, parks and other things. Maybe we need to be, that way with some of that other stuff. But if we don't sort of track it all and keep track of it, it can get all mixed up as to what are we focusing on and when and how. So I'll shut up now.
No, that'd be super helpful to see, Jesse. And I don't want to speak for Alan, but I'm hoping he agrees with me that we would rather modify something that Christine developed than start from scratch. I'm guessing it is very well thought through and could be easily repurposed for our issues. Before we close out on education, I think there's been a lot of good ideas already with the survey, engaging the PTAs. Josephine, I see that you had a chance to join us. Was there anything that you wanted to suggest as well in terms of areas of focus for the next year?
I thank you, Kit. Sorry, my camera was on. I was on another meeting. Idea that Jesse just had about having a way to keep track of all this, because we've been working on this for a while, and things like the elevator at environmental science, all these things that we have to get back to, and they just keep falling off. So I love that idea. PTAs are always tricky because they engage with part of the school community but not the whole school community, but it's definitely a start. So Jesse and I were just in contact with several of the PTAs with the outdoor learning, so I'm sure some of them are still on. So, we can at least start there. And, try. That's all I really have to say. Thanks.
And actually, Kit, can I just say one last thing? Sorry, on a slightly related topic to what we talked about several months ago. I love the fact that we really focused on SYEP and made sure that there was funding for it. And I think it would actually be great to invite somebody to come talk to us this fall, giving us a report out like, so how many students did participate, and what was the success rate, and did they have valuable experiences, and what are lessons learned going forward, and how can we help to make sure that it's done well and earlier, kind of thing. So I would just want to add SYEP to our list of things to address this year too.
I'll also quickly throw out one idea before we shift to arts and culture, which is tutoring to support kids who experience disruption to their learning with getting back on the trajectories they were on before the pandemic. Mostly I'm talking about academic tutoring, but there's also interventions and supports in the social emotional realm that I think many kiddos would benefit from based on what they've experienced in the past year and a half. I don't know what focusing on that would look like or sound like, but it's another potential area similar to SYEP. And actually, interestingly, SYEP participants did some of the pilot tutoring during the Summer Rises program this past summer, which I thought was pretty cool. Let's move on to arts and culture. Sarah let us know that she was not going to be able to join tonight. A couple things that she mentioned were getting sort of regular meetings for the subcommittee together and planning those far in advance so that people can hopefully block the time and protect it. But we do have Tamara here, so would love to hear your thoughts and thoughts from anyone else on the education subcommittee about where to focus in the coming year.
Thank you. And we unfortunately had to cancel our last subgroup. And I think Sarah's point about trying to just lock it in earlier hopefully will help us. Some of this I'm just building upon what we shared at the last meeting. And I think just that budget process was really helpful to us. And actually listening to all of you talk about the other subgroups is that having a real understanding of what the needs are and not sort of assuming what those would be. And so I dare want to say that we had thought about a survey, but maybe just like needs assessment. And I think there's many ways to do it. In the field that I'm in the arts, we're always surveying folks, but we always talk about the bias in surveys, like who fills them out, who doesn't fill them out, the way that you ask the questions. And one thing that I know that Sarah and I've been talking about is how to more proactively not only reach out to arts organizations, but first getting a really comprehensive list of all the organizations in our district or those serving our district, and inviting them also to come in. And I think the idea that even Jesse was saying that there's both sort of formal presentations and how the subgroup can do some work in trying to tease out what are some of the issues facing arts and culture, and not only just for organizations, but even what we've seen a lot with the sort of open culture. There's been a lot of great initiatives for artists, but artists individually having to manage those. We've also heard some challenges around that. So I think figuring out this sort of needs assessment, I think both from hopefully surveys one way to do it, but also really inviting organizations. I will also say there's some networks, and I think I've mentioned this, there's like a loose coalition called the West Side Cultural Network, which is both sort of arts and culture, but also open, the High Line and sort of park and open spaces are part of that. And many of them are really trying to navigate what a new administration could be, and what does it mean to not have your councilman also your speaker. And so I think there's a lot of needing to sort of build some relationships there, and whenever, however we could be helpful in that, I think could be something. And to remember that in the district, there are both much larger institutions that can have just deeper range and staff to help with those type of things, and some that are really small that had to do a lot of cutbacks, obviously due to COVID. So I'm not sure if anyone else has other things to add or questions.
Tamara, there information available by any group that you know of that sort of says, like, you know, over the course of the last 18 months, X% of artists moved out of state or have switched careers? I guess I'm just wondering, sort of like, is there like an impact statement almost about sort of what happened to our arts community generally in the city? And obviously, more specifically, it'd be great if we knew about what the specific, some of the bigger impact was of the pandemic, you know, because we hear all the little individual stories. I'm just wondering, do you know, does anybody know of if any of that bigger information was tracked at all?
I don't have it. And I know that there's a lot of advocacy that is not just our district, that sort of tracks that impact, that they were sort of gathering data to really help them get funds, both, I think both on the local and obviously the federal level. But I don't sort of have a report, and I don't know if Jesse, that's something you've seen, but I know one thing that Sarah and I were talking about is how we can actually also talk directly with, you know, other agencies come to the community board, but how sort of like DCLA could come and maybe share some data that they might have. But I don't know, Jesse, if you have anything. Square just moved, sorry.
No, I mean, I wouldn't know exactly. I mean, maybe the mayor's office of media or something like that would. I don't. It matters whether they you know, track that. I could see it much more being a kind of a union, maybe from a union perspective of just someone doing that homework and data, you know, analysis. You know.
I know that there was some orgs that definitely were doing impact about their layoffs that they had to do. It doesn't sort of save someone out of a district, but there definitely was impact that orgs were doing to sort of say, hey, this is how COVID's impacted us and whether we have to scale down staffing. And there is one other thing I wanted to add is I always think that there's great sort of intersectionality between the areas that we've even talked about. And a lot what comes up for organizations is how to, obviously people need funding. They're always asking for kind of funding, but really networking and connections and audience development, and how, you know, if schools are looking for, if you're thinking about the sort of lack of arts-based funding, there are lots of these arts organizations are providing both in school, after school programming, and how we as a community board can be a platform that helps maybe make some of those connections is something for us to maybe explore and think about. But definitely we want to hear from the arts groups, but that's something we want to ask some questions about.
Jessica?
Yeah, I was going to say, Katie, your question, maybe we could reach out to Jessie, help me remember her name. She was from the Actors Fund, the co-chair of HHHS for a while. Barbara, I can read your lips, but I can't, you're on mute.
Wow, that was impressive. Yeah, no, Barbara. Those two
so, because she was like, she knows the kind of thing that we would want. And she always was very passionate about data collection also. She might just, she might be helpful. So that might be something. The other thing I was going to mention, and this is like wildly not creative, and obviously our district has so much theater and arts in it that this might seem like a terrible idea, but in the way that every board has to put together their statement of district needs. And for years, actually, I've heard there's been some frustration that we haven't had a lot of arts requests at the top of our budget list. And I wonder if we might want to look at some other statement of district needs to see the kinds of things that other committees are putting out. Again, so different because like we have a theater district and, you know, most community boards don't, but it just might help us think about the kinds of requests that could be, that like what we could work towards if we feel like we're not really sure, which again seems like we must know because we have so many resources and so therefore so many challenges. But it seems like it's been a kind of struggle for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years that I've been involved to really name an arts like platform or policy set of policy requests. So just another idea.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just on that, I think maybe large groups like the Actors Fund or others, or the group that David Pincus is part of Independent Theater League, I think, right? I think would probably be maybe good for that. I foresee it similar to being the same struggle we have with education, in that we kind of want to advocate for specific items that the principals really want, but trying to sort of chase them down and get them to tell us what they want is not always the easiest thing. And so I think I think maybe it's a perception thing where, I mean, I looked at what Corey's discretionary funding went to this year, and a lot of it went to theater, went to individual theater projects and stuff. And so I think it's clearly that they're asking for the money, right? They just don't think maybe to say, where do we play a role? Right? What does Community Board 4 do? Right? And so, I not to say that we should involve ourselves where we not necessarily needed to be involved, but like if it might be a way of kind of talking to some of those bigger umbrella organizations that know how to do that, and letting them know, like, we could advocate, right? We could be helpful in that and be part of that individual request. And that helps build our network larger to have those relationships with those groups. I think about the theater that we were having our meetings in for before COVID, pre-COVID, that all came from a very similar kind of relationship building, simply because they were, I forget why they had come to us, but they came to us, and therefore we end up being able to use their space. And not to say that that's what the goal should always be, but it's just, that's where those relationships end up blossoming.
Other thoughts, arts, culture? All right. Before we move on to new and old business, I'm guessing we're all going to get out of here before 8:30, which always makes me feel warm and fuzzy. Anyone who hasn't had a chance to share something that they want to suggest that we focus on, especially folks who haven't had a chance to come off mute, I'm not going to be throwing you under the bus by calling your names out, but if there's something that you wanted to suggest that hasn't come up organically, now's the time.
The only piece, hello, everybody. Going back to rats, everyone's favorite topic. The only thing I would add is, I know there's already so much conversation around what to do with dining, outdoor dining, and all of that. I don't know. There's so much involvement. We may say we don't really want to touch it. The flip side of that is that so much of what is, so many of the big question marks around it have to do with street life, including rats. So I don't know if that's something where we feel like we want to have a greater presence in those conversations. Again, there may be enough person power there that we don't feel like we need to. But I just have a feeling, especially also being, since I'm on the BLP committee as well, that it's going to be interesting when this becomes truly permanent, and just the complaints, the noise, the trash, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know how much we'd want a chance to shape any of that, but those are my 2 cents.
David, are you replying directly to that? If not, I want to quickly ask something to Jesse.
Well, I'm kind of what you said before, but you're also dealing with the rat. Now, I came in late, so you might have actually came up with this because I had emailed you and Blake about this. Check pads and transportation committee want to put these the trash in streets, but I'm thinking if they do it that way, maybe they could do it the way they do in Europe, where it's enclosed, so rats and rodents can't get in. So if the trash is put in the I forgot what they call them, but special bins, they can't get in because they're so sealed, whether they're plastic or metal. But I remember when I was in Italy and in France, they had these, and they didn't take up walkway space. It was in the street, and it was totally enclosed. So that would be a huge solution to the rats. Now, that means we'd be commingling with transportation. I don't know how we feel about that, but I certainly think it might not eliminate the rat population, but certainly decrease it.
Yeah, we did touch on the check pads pilot, which it sounds like was probably paused due to the pandemic, but is going to happen, and sort of re-engaging to hopefully hear and learn from what works. We didn't necessarily talk in detail about the design and containerizing in the way that they do in lots of other countries. But that's helpful to call out as well. Jesse, do you want to sort of chime in on the way in which our committee should think about working with transportation? Because our conversations so far have been sort of ad hoc as this comes up, which I think has been serving its purpose. But if this is going to be, part of multiple conversations that we're having over the course of this year about outdoor dining, which definitely overlaps with transportation in a huge way, and arguably they're better positioned to drive it than we are. What do you think would be helpful for all of us to hear?
Yeah, I still think maybe taking it topic by topic is the most effective in understanding who's going to take the lead. I think we do that with land use, and transportation does that a lot, where it'll be it's a land use item, it's a siting item, so it's clearly a land use item, but transportation has a major significant role. So, transportation leadership attends the land use meeting, and they might have their own committee discussion about the topic, then bring that to the land use meeting. So I think just having that check-in with transportation on how, right, is this should this be in ACES, should this be in land transportation, can you split the topic up into different components, come back to it, something along those lines. Joint committees are actually holding a joint committee on something has its own downsides to it, because you're then having to create quorum for two committees. One, operationally, it's sort of difficult. Two, besides that topic, which might be the overlap, you guys might have a bunch of other topics that have nothing to do with transportation. They have nothing to do with, and they might have topics that have nothing to do with ACES. And so trying to just coordinate that and having just a coordination and work product, it makes it more complicated. So I think in rare cases, maybe open restaurants is a rare case, because it's such a big thing, and it's clearly, and clearly in such flux, and does affect so many committees. I am never the one to recommend some sort of working group, but it might be something to discuss in terms of going forward on how this board responds. I don't know, but I do think transportation is the lead on it, and I think BLP plays a major role, but I do think maybe it warrants having a discussion about kind of like how we want to respond to that specific topic going forward. So I hope that gives you what you were looking to hear from me, Kit. In terms of the rat thing, I've just give you a little background on my life. I cut my teeth with Gail Brewer chasing rats down on the Upper West Side. So, I will say rats will always be here. And so they will ebb and flow. We are right now in a very unique situation in which we have things like open restaurants. We have sanitation not where it should be, right, in terms of funding. And we have a Department of Health whose entire focus is on vaccination, screening enforcement. So there are like literally 5 health inspectors in charge dealing with rat inspections. Like, it is a robust program. It is one of the most advanced, proactive, progressive programs in the world that has been cut at the knees because of COVID. And so that is why I put it in, I suggested at the budget requests at the budget task force that we put in something that if things don't change by the preliminary budget next year, I think we need to really advocate for increased funding for inspectors on the Department of Health for pest management, because there's just no one out there. And they're saying that. I'm not, bad mouthing them. They're telling us that, their program is right now solely focused on vaccination enforcement. And so I think we're in a point in time. So I that's just to say, I think we can spend some time on rats and get to understand what's going on and everything. But I think things hopefully will be better and different, shortly. And I just don't.
Before those rats have like millions and billions of babies, but I hear you.
Yes, no, I know. I've been to rat academies. I've walked the streets. I've opened up trash cans and found 24 little rats, but in trash cans. I've done it. I've seen it and done it all. So, and rats are a great topic because there's no advocacy group on the other side that you have to deal with. I just don't. One thing though, I just want to make sure we don't go too far off of the stuff we talked about in terms of next year or sort of goals for next year in terms of action items and who's doing what. Because I just want to make sure that if people want me to set up meetings with PTAs, please email me or direct me to. If I'm putting together a survey, send me the questions and I'll draft the survey, send it back around. I just want to make sure that I'm not going to. I just want to be clear. Unless I'm like directed by somebody to do so, I'm not going to sort of be able to just start doing that without sort of who's going to take the lead on it from a board member perspective. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah, good flag. I see that David has his hand raised. Wendy, I thought that you had your hand raised. Did your question get addressed, or was there something else you wanted to say?
It could also just be email. My question was just whether, if I remember somebody from CB4, probably multiple people going to one of those, there's like an open forum hearing about restaurants. Was that Christine? I'm just thinking through like next steps around if we want to decide if it's a working group or is it just a discussion, who from CB4 has already been involved in those kind of open forum conversations.
I would talk with Christine and I would talk with Frank and Bert.
Okay, perfect.
I think those are the folks that you want to consult with in terms of, and obviously the folks that are on here this as well, Blake and others who have obviously expressed interest in it. So I think,
one more question, Jesse, on this working group idea, and then I'll go to David. Is there
not my idea? It was not my idea.
Not Jesse's idea. But
not my idea. I was not recommending this.
I have a question for you, no matter where the idea came from. Is there anyone who sits on transportation, ACES, and BLP, or only people who sit on two of the three?
I don't think anybody sits on all three here.
Okay. David.
I sit on transportation. I used to sit on BLP, but that was very time consuming. I wasn't fair to the committee member. But I have first of all, I want to advocate for the rats. No, I'm just joking. I have a theoretical question. Down the road, if there's an issue with the public seating or whatever, the public restaurants, whether it's rats or whatever it is, can we, or this is not kosher, can we, when we're negotiating with BLP, if BLP is negotiating a liquor license, they can go in, they can negotiate to say, okay, listen, we want this open seating to be designed this way, and your trash receptacles to be this, in order for them to improve the license. They could do that prior to the SLA. So sometimes they negotiate things. Is that doable, Jesse, or you don't know, or what do you think of that down the road? Because that would involve us.
I actually would defer to Wendy. You're on BLP currently, right? Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult because the program currently now doesn't require anything from us. So we don't get to see anything. Just to be clear, all the open restaurants that are out there, no one came to tell us about it, right? They're just happening.
No, I got that, but when they were applying
Going
for,
forward though, yeah, but going forward though, I don't know what the process will be, but the thing is that SLA is not the DOT. And so it's two different agencies. So, I mean, we can ask the restaurant to commit to X, Y, and Z, but
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
But SLA can say that's not in our purview, right? That's not us. That's DOT. I don't know what SLA will say at the long term with these types of things. So our hook is always that if they are agreeing to stipulations that SLA includes them into their license, therefore, if they are not following them, technically we can notify SLA and SLA can get tough on them, right? And so, but if it's another agency's purview, that creates another kind of more gray.
Well, that's why. Yeah, that's why.
But I would defer to people on the committee on that. I don't attend the committee that often, but I think that's, to my mind, I could see that being the issue. So
I think we sent a note either beginning of this year, maybe end of last year, just in general saying whenever we get to the point of starting to talk about making more final decisions about that program, to bring the community boards in for exactly this reason, to figure out like what could those measures be, whether, maybe it's something like you treat it like a sidewalk cafe now, where you have to come to BLP and talk about it, even though it's a DCA thing. So that's, an option on the table.
I think that brings us to a close, unless there's any new or old business. I do want to circle back to Jesse's comment, but anything that anyone wants to bring up before we talk about next steps moving forward? Cool. So Alan, let me know if you had a different thought on this, but my instinct was, we've heard a lot of good ideas. I'm not sure there's anything that needs to happen at 9 a.m. tomorrow. But the way that we could potentially move forward is folks who have been leading up subcommittees, let us know what the asks are of Jesse, and we can move them forward expeditiously. The survey, I think, is closest to ready to go, if not ready to go, from the education subgroup. Blake, I know you've been working on a wide variety of things. So let's try to get things sort of moving through the pipeline, which will eventually live in a tracker that will look very much like the tracker that Christine Berthet uses on transportation. Does that sound okay, Alan?
100%. I think what we need to do is maybe just zero in on a couple of issues from each group, get those on the board. There's been a lot of ideas, and there will be more ideas, but I think just to try to zero in on some specifics would be very helpful, and then get those going through the system. Yeah. But I was going to say, when follow up to Wendy, is that we're still in the process with this open restaurant thing going forward. So it would be important to kind of like formalize some things that we want in those standards that will have to come out in terms of how this whole thing rolls out. So that might be an issue. Maybe we can try to get off the ground right now, to make some suggestions, and I'm sure they'll be the same ones that the other committees come up with. We will have the same interest in hand. So I think that would be an important issue. I don't know when was this public hearing supposed to start at some point in time on this. I'm not sure. I keep hearing things when or something. Yes, you do know, or when you know.
It's a set of listening. It's a set of my understanding. It's not technically a public hearing because it's not that's an official term that requires a set of specific body over here, but I think my understanding is instead of kind of community outreach listening sessions, I think is what they basically are. And so I got an email about them a press release about them a while ago. I don't know what the current schedule is though, off the top of my head.
So there's no timeline at this point as to when the city's going to actually put certain standards or certain practices into the works, or is it just?
Yeah, I'll be honest with Alan, after the press release, I sort of lost track of what they are. I would have to take a look at it. I mean, technically the ULURP was in ULURP. So, my understanding is I have to look at it, but I think the ULURP is done. And so in terms of when they want to operationalize all of this is another topic, but I think the ULURP is over. So again, that's not the street open restaurant component. That's simply just the DCA sidewalk cafe component.
Thanks. All right, cool. Thank you. A lot of good stuff, I would say, going forward. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think the headline is "The Rats Are Winning," but we're going to do something about it. All right, everybody. Thank you for. What'd you say, Jesse?
The Rats have always been winning. Just to be clear.
Well, we're not giving them a good fight the way that we used to. So something's got to change.
Jessica will be in charge. She'll get it all done.
Rat power.
Thank you, everybody, for sharing really good ideas about what we could focus on in the year ahead. Looking forward to continuing the conversation both in our meetings, in subcommittee meetings, and over email. And I hope everybody has a good rest of your night.
Good night, everybody.
Is there a motion? We need a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Have a good night and good Thanksgiving, everyone.
Happy holidays.
Second.
Stay
Thank
safe.
you.
Stay safe.
Okay.
Bye.